Hi and welcome to the open source video blog number 11. My name is ANAVI. I'm a software engineer and I'm doing the open source video blog in my spare time just for fun. I'm live streaming from my hometown Plovdiv, Bulgaria. Here it is almost midnight and there are a couple of reasons why I'm doing this at such an unusual time, so late at local time. First of all, there is an European football championship that's going on right now, and I'm the games. There's even a game going on right now. They're playing extra time. The second reason is that I'm doing this in my spare time, so I needed some time to prepare the slides. I hope it's going to be an interesting episode. We will spend approximately 25-30 minutes with the open source video blog. This is a monthly edition. I try to do it once per month. It's a different time of month, but recently I'm doing it at the end of the month. Please use the chat to let me know if you have any news to share, any feedback. It's always nice to see the opinion of other people watching the show, of other open source enthusiasts. The majority of the news that we're going to cover in this episode are about open source hardware. However, we have a little bit of software news and we're going to start with the software. I would like to present you a project called MyGNUHealth. This is a project under the GNU umbrella. It includes several projects. The idea is to provide a digital health ecosystem where social medicine meets state-of-the-art health informatics. The modules that are available right now are hospital management information system, laboratory information system, GNUHealth Embedded, which is an interesting project because the idea is to install software on certified open source hardware devices capable of running Linux and to run this software locally without the need of internet connection, so you can store medical information on them. And there is also one additional project under the MyGNUHealth umbrella. This is the Thalamus project, which provides RESTful APIs in order to access all these other projects. If you would like to learn more, please visit GNUHealth.org. You can download these projects, install them, have a look at them. It's something that I've recently learned, so to be honest, I haven't tried them yet. This is something that I plan to do in near future, but for the moment I haven't used them. I'm really interested in this initiative because the last year showed us that there are a lot of things that can happen in the medical industry, and there are a lot of things that happen using open source technologies. The open source is often people think about open source as something free, and it is actually. However, it is something more than this, because open source is about sharing ideas and about sharing knowledge and extending this knowledge over the time. So having something like MyGNUHealth can help for the whole industry, for the health industry in long term, to become better. We'll see if this works. In general, in open source, the problem is how to find funding. They have some funding to develop this thing, and things don't happen overnight, so give them some time, but it's a great initiative in my opinion, and something that we should keep an eye on. Now, Linux 5.13 has been released. Yes, a couple of days ago, Linus Torvalds announced the next release of the Linux kernel. As you know, the Linux kernel has a very well-scheduled release cycles. Every 3 to 4 months there is a new version coming out. Linux 5.13 includes more than 6,000 new Git commit messages if you don't count the merge commits. If you take the merge commits in account, that makes almost 17,000 Git commit messages for this release. More than 2,000 developers. Can you imagine this? 2,000 developers have contributed to this particular release. Amazing. It's amazing. Probably the largest open source, not probably, for sure, the largest open source project which involves developers all around the world. And by the way, the Linux kernel is celebrating 30 years in 2021. The Linux kernel was started in August 1991 by Linus Torvalds as a small hobby project, and look what happened. Probably the greatest project of all time, which is used almost everywhere. Speaking about this particular release, Linux 5.13, as usual, it includes security improvements. That's something that Linux is well known. There's also work to support Apple M1 processors. I'm sure that if you're watching this blog, you're familiar with the Apple story about processors. Although Apple is notorious for not being an open source company, Linux runs on Apple devices. For approximately, I think, 13 or maybe 14 years, Apple was using Intel processors for their desktops and laptops. They switched from PowerPC to Intel, I believe, in 2007. I might be wrong about the exact year, it doesn't matter. And last year they decided to switch from Intel to ARM. This is not so unusual because for many years they have been using ARM for their iPhones, and now they're using ARM processors in their laptops. So the Linux kernel is preparing to support these laptops, and it should be possible again to install GNU Linux distribution on an Apple hardware. There are also patches for ARM and RISC-V architectures available in Linux 5.13 kernel. CNX Software had a great article covering some highlights for various ARM devices and vendors as part of the patches of the Linux kernel version 5.13. There are also patches for RISC-V. RISC-V is ARM alternative, new architecture, which is an open architecture. And it is also worth noticing that there are just a few patches in this Linux kernel version for MIPS. RISC-V is rising, while MIPS is one of the dying hardware platforms. It's very rare nowadays to see a new device based on MIPS. They still exist, but they're definitely not as popular as they used to be. And if you would like to read all the details written by Linus Torvalds, check the mailing list. Here in the slide I have a link. After that I'll post it in the description of the video, so you'll be able to read it from the mastermind of the Linux kernel. Now, moving on to more hardware specific news. Actually, the first thing that I would like to show you was shared by a friend. I wasn't aware about this. I wasn't aware about this project, and huge thanks to the friend who shared it with me. It's called, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, VOLLA phone. It was crowdfunded a year ago. Somehow I've missed that. It was crowdfunded in March, actually more than a year ago, in March 2020, initially through Kickstarter, and now it's accepting orders through Indiegogo in demand. They have already delivered the first batch of phones, which is amazing. Often such campaigns, this is not the first campaign for a phone like this. This is more user-friendly, open-source friendly phone, which is trying not to use a standard Android, but instead to provide actually again Android, but in a different shape. Also to support iOS Sailfish and Ubuntu. And in the past 5 to 10 years, there have been a lot of crowdfunding attempts for campaigns for similar devices. Most of them had epic fail, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but so far it looks it's working out well, because based on what I've read, VOLLA phone has delivered some units. So maybe this time it's going to be something done in a proper way, that there will be a real product which will be delivered to the backers. So the smartphone is in terms of hardware, it's not open source hardware. It's with MediaTek Helio P23 system on a chip. MediaTek is one of the very popular systems on a chip used in smartphones, alongside with things like Qualcomm. The phone is with just 4 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of storage, so the hardware capabilities are definitely nothing impressive. I would rather say, I'm not even sure if it's in the mid-range for a modern smartphone. It's really nothing impressive in terms of hardware. What is impressive about is that it comes with its own operating system. Well, actually, it's an operating system with a specific UI based on the Android open source project, which is a vanilla Android without Google specific applications. Also, the VOLLA phone supports YOA Selfish OS. YOA has a very, very interesting story. I was one of the very first owners of YOA's first device back in 2013. I remember how I bought it. I was super excited with it. I used it for a while, and then I switched back to Android. But yeah, if you would like to give Selfish OS a try, here is a device that supports it. Furthermore, VOLLA phone can work with canonical Ubuntu Touch. So that's a device working with Ubuntu Touch. Neither Ubuntu nor Selfish OS made a huge impact on the market. They have been around for 7-8 years. The good news is that somehow they are surviving, moving on forward. They found their sustainable business models, and it's good to see devices that are supporting them. Now we're moving on to the hardware section, and there will be a lot of news about hardware, open source hardware, but the first announcement is not about open source hardware. It's about the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi, unfortunately, is supporting a lot of open source software, but it's not open source hardware. And recently Hackaday published an article with the title about the Raspberry Pi hardware documentation and the lack of documentation, actually. So a user of Raspberry Pi 4 opened a GitHub issue in an appropriate documentation repository in GitHub about the schematics of the USB power in. If you remember well, after the release of the initial version of the Raspberry Pi 4, there was an issue with the USB-C connector and the power of the USB-C connector. Actually, I have one of the very first models which I bought, and this is a model with this problem. After that, the Raspberry Pi Foundation released version 1.2, I think, a new hardware revision which fixes this. However, the fix is not described in the documentation, and because of this, the people from the community are asking, hey, what's going on? Will you at least update the schematics? Releasing the schematic doesn't make the product open source hardware, not at all. In order to be open source hardware, you need to release all the schematics in a way that you can modify them, export the Gerber files and the drill files, and manufacture the same device. In the case of Raspberry Pi, we're not talking about this. We're talking just about releasing the schematics so that software engineers working on new products where Raspberry Pi is embedded can understand how to write the software in a sustainable way, in a compatible way with the Raspberry Pi. And the Raspberry Pi Foundation is obviously not releasing, not keeping up to date the schematics, because they released the initial schematics and didn't update them. So just like a summary, Raspberry Pi is a great platform. I love it, but keep in mind it's not open source hardware, and I'm not sure if it's gonna become open source hardware. So if you are an open source enthusiast, also keep an eye on Raspberry Pi alternatives, which are open source hardware certified by the Open Source Hardware Association. For example, recently I published a video about Beagle 5, which is a development board from the Beagle Board Foundation in association with Seed Studio and Star 5 with RISC-V CPU. That's a fully open source alternative with all schematics and everything released. It's even better. It will be on the market soon. And after we covered Raspberry Pi, which is not open source hardware, we're moving to a long list of open source hardware devices, and we're starting with an announcement from Olimex. After very long time of development, Olimex released on the market STM MP1 boards. So let's start with this, that ST is a French company. It's very popular for microcontrollers, and in 2019 they decided to enter the market for systems on a chip capable of running Linux, which is, in my opinion, something great, because they can offer systems on a chip which are at reasonable costs. They are not super expensive. They're not cheap, definitely not cheap, but affordable. These systems on a chip that they released, STMP1 series, they're not very powerful. So if you intend to play games on them, no, that's not the point. But they're very useful for industrial applications. And Olimex have been developing this board for quite some time. It was delayed probably because of the global chip shortage, but finally it's there. The idea here is that this is an evaluation board, and it supports several SOMs. SOM stands for System on a Module. So the system on a module contains not only the STM SOC, but also RAM, and it's attached on the evaluation board. So basically you can buy both of them. You have to buy both of them if you want to boot and use it. However, the idea here is that for people working on on industrial application designs, they can build their own evaluation board, instead of an evaluation board, their own board for the specific needs that they have. Because of this board by Olimex, in my opinion, it's not for the maker market. It's rather for small-scale manufacturing of specific industrial devices. And I believe that in the coming year or two, we'll see more and more boards with STM MP1. Keep in mind that Olimex has released 2 systems on a module for the carrier board, for the evaluation board that they have. The first one is with extended temperature range, and it's running on 800 megahertz. The second one is in industrial temperature range, which is from -40 up to 85 Celsius, and it's running at a lower speed, 650 megahertz. Definitely something worth keeping an eye on. I believe Olimex are also working on single board computer with the same STM MP1. So I expect to see it soon on the market. Another thing coming from Olimex is the Olimex LoRa SX1276 modules. We have covered LoRa in past editions of the open source video blog. This is a long-range communication protocol which transmits small amounts of data but over very long ranges. It's convenient for things like smart cities. Unfortunately, until recently, the LoRa gateways as well as client devices were kind of expensive. However, here are some alternatives. The pricing starts at a little bit less than €7 without taxes and shipping. You can order it at Olimex.com. There are two versions of these modules. One of the modules is it's a breadboard friendly, so you can solder pins, put it on a breadboard. Really cool for prototyping. There's also a version of the module which supports external antenna. The antenna is useful for extending the range. Yeah, so if you're interested in LoRa, if you have a LoRa gateway and you need client devices, have a look at this. It's a really interesting open source hardware project. Now we're going to cover the certified open source hardware projects this month. This is something that's happening thanks to the Open Source Hardware Association, which is a legal entity from the United States. The idea is that they have two goals. The first goal is of the Open Source Hardware Association is to organize the Open Source Hardware Summit, which was a couple of months ago, and we spoke about it. The second goal is to foster open source hardware movement by running the certification directory. It's very hard to understand if a device is open. Sometimes it's very hard to understand if a device is open source hardware. A lot of companies and individuals are saying, hey, I'm doing open source hardware, but is it open source hardware for real? Are all the schematics available? Can you export the Gerber files? Can you modify it? Can you make the same unit and sell it? Is it powered by open source firmware and software? Unlike software, it's a little bit more tricky to understand if an open source hardware project is actually open source. And this is where Open Source Hardware Association is playing a very important role, because they're running this program, and in June they selected a long list of projects. We're gonna cover in more detail some of these projects. Let's start with Passport, which is a next generation Bitcoin hardware wallet that uses a camera to transact via QR codes. So this thing that looks like an old school phone is actually a cryptocurrency wallet especially for Bitcoin. It's available for almost $300 US. However, this includes free US shipping. If you would like to buy it from outside in the United States, you have to add $25 US more. According to the information on their website, this device is assembled in the United States, and it has been certified by the Open Source Hardware Association under number with prefix US, because it's coming from the United States, 2005, which means that there are more than 2,000 open source hardware projects from the United States. Isn't that amazing? Several years ago, the number of certified projects was a fraction of this, and now you can see more and more projects come in, and all of them are open source hardware. Another open source hardware project certified by the Open Source Hardware Association, again coming from the United States, is Tympan, an open source hearing aid development tool. The hardware is based on the popular development boards from the Tennessee family and from the software side on Node-RED. Visit the URL to order, to see how you can order, to see the revisions and more details. Now we're moving on to another certified device. It's a maker device, and it's a very interesting device for me because this device is actually from Bulgaria. I'm also from Bulgaria. I don't know the person who has created it, but I'm super happy to see more and more projects from Bulgaria certified by the Open Source Hardware Association. And let's have a quick look at it. It's an indoor air quality board with a bunch of sensors. It has a very modular design, which is compatible with Wemos ESP32 or ESP8266 boards. However, the author of the project, has explicitly said that it's not recommended to use it with ESP8266. He recommends ESP32. There is a mini OLED display. There is a dust sensor, also a carbon dioxide sensor, BME 280 sensor, which is for temperature, barometric pressure, and humidity. There is a light sensor and a volatile organic compound sensor. All of them are coming as modules. The PCB has been designed with KiCad. It's available at GitHub. It also has this interesting 3D printed enclosure which you can slide. It's certified by the Open Source Hardware Association with prefix BG because it's coming from Bulgaria, number 78. So hey, we have 78 open source hardware devices in Bulgaria, and it's available to order at Tindi, so we can buy all the sensors. Of course, if you don't want to order it, you can save a dime and build it on your own because it's open source. However, I highly encourage you to purchase it from Tindi, first of all, because this is the easiest way to source all the needed components in one place. And second, which is actually even more important, is that this way you're gonna support Nikolai Kitanov, who is the author of this project. And speaking about projects from Bulgaria, I'm using this opportunity for a small advertisement of a project that I'm doing that was recently crowdfunded at CrowdSupply. This is a small keyboard which I have designed. It has only 2 keys. Here it is. You have seen it in the previous episode. It's now fully funded. We have started the manufacturing, and it will soon be available for shipping, probably in about a couple of months. It's with ATtiny85. It was a huge challenge to find ATtiny85, and thanks to several of the suppliers from which we buy microcontrollers, we were able to stock enough quantity, primarily from Mouser as well as from some local European suppliers. Yeah, that's amazing. Even something as simple as microchip ATtiny85, which is 15 or 16 years old, and is primarily used for soldering kits, and nowadays it's hard to find it. Luckily, I have enough for the demand so far, so I expect that this project will be shipped on time. Now we're moving to the last section of the open source hardware video blog, and it's about upcoming open source events. I'm really happy to say that we will see some live events, hopefully. So starting with the dates. First of all, in the middle of next month in July, on 17th of July, is the Hong Kong Open Source Conference 2021. I don't want to reveal details, but I hope that I'll be part of the schedule, which will be soon released. It's a virtual event, so even if you're not in Asia or in Hong Kong, you can watch it and take part of the Hong Kong open source event. I've attended this event in 2015 and 2016. It's been 5 years since my last visit in Hong Kong. It was a great event. They have an excellent community, and Hong Kong is an amazing city, really interesting to visit. Now we're not traveling as we used to travel. At least I'm not traveling as much as I used to travel. Probably same goes for you. Still, there are so many interesting events happening online, and have a look at the Hong Kong Open Source Conference, because I expect interesting talks in it. Moving on to the events in August, something is going to happen in Bulgaria, in Sofia. It's called OpenFest. This is an annual open source conference that's happening for, I'm not sure, 17, 18 years in Bulgaria. I've been part of it in different roles for the last decade, as a visitor, presenting some talks, as helping out with the organization and the heralding, and I'm a volunteer this year too. A couple of other conferences that we have been following for a while. This is the Linux Plumbers Conference happening at the end of September, right before the Embedded Linux Conference. The Embedded Linux Conference is another event that is going to be It's going to be a live event with some attendees going to Seattle, Washington, and for people who are not able to go to the event in person, there is still the option to watch it virtually, to take part in it online. So this is a hybrid event, and this is something that Linux Foundation is now pushing forward, and I'm really enjoying this idea. It's a very good job. Well done, Linux Foundation, because this way more people will join these events. And of course, it's always better if you can be there in person, meet other people, chat with other people. But the online option is also a good option. And when you have both of these options, it's perfect. So I believe that Linux Foundation is showing the whole community, everyone out there, how modern conferences in the 21st century should happen. Even when it's safe to have people in one place, I think it's still a good idea to have more interactive options for online, for hybrid events where people online can interact and watch presentations that are happening live. A few more words about OpenFest. As I told you, this is happening here in Bulgaria, actually in Sofia. This is the capital city of Bulgaria. OpenFest is now searching for volunteers. The call for papers is also open, so if you have an interesting presentation and if you can come and visit Sofia in the middle of the summer, it's going to be hot, probably very hot, but it's a good opportunity because the OpenFest event last year in 2020 was an online event, so we didn't meet as we do regularly. The last OpenFest event in person was in November 2019, and now in 2021 the event will be again in person. However, this time it's going to be an open air event, which means that people will be in a park, in a fresh air, so hopefully it will be a very safe event. There is a free entrance, and as soon as the schedule is available, I'll let you know, probably by the end of the next month when I'll be doing the next episode of the open source video blog. Thank you very much for watching. I see that there are a few people watching live, which is amazing. Thank you very much for joining. It's almost it's past midnight here. So I don't know what is the time zone in your on your side. Sorry for being a little bit sleepy, but it's been a long day. Still, I'm happy that I made this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you like it, hit the like button. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. This is not a professional live stream. It's just something that I'm doing for fun. Oh, and I see some comments. Well, thank you very much, guys. And it's amazing to see these people watching my live stream. Very, very well-known open source developers making some amazing things. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was interesting. And thank you for the great work that you are doing on open source projects. It's amazing to be able to know people like you guys. I hope we'll be able soon to meet again on things like FOSDEM or OpenFest, to have a beer together as we used to do it back in the old good times. But the times for open source now are better than ever. So open source, both open source hardware and open source software are experiencing excellent time. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for new episodes. Really huge thanks for watching, and huge thanks for all of you contributing to open source projects. See you soon. Bye bye.